Hello, everybody. I'm Mark Grayson. If you don't know who I am, I'm the founding director of Trinity Spiritual Center. And I do see some new faces, so I'll just briefly mention that Trinity Spiritual Center is an open, welcoming community that provides support for seekers, no matter what their belief system may be. And so we're thrilled that everyone is here with us today. As we gather for what will be the last program of this programming season. So with that, I'm going to introduce Chip. As you know from all the many emails that we sent out, um, we are talking to an extraordinary human being. He's had a lot of success in life, uh, founding Joie de Vivre, the first or one of the first boutique hotel chains, and then having a second attempt at changing the hospitality business, in which he succeeded as a senior executive part of the Airbnb team. He's a Stanford undergrad, a Stanford MBA. And on the surface of it all, Chip, it all sounds like you've had a storybook life, but as your book reveals, there were a lot of challenges along the way. And that those challenges are probably even as important, if not more, in sort of shaping the conversation that we're going to have today. So I'll leave it to you to talk about those in a minute, but I'm thrilled to have you with us today, as we can all benefit from your experience and wisdom
Thank you.
at this stage of life.
Thank you, Mark. It's an honor to be here on a Sunday and to be invited to everybody's home in Connecticut. I'm going to talk for about 10 minutes right now, just about maybe framing some thoughts, and then you and I are going to do a fireside chat, and then we'll open it up for everybody else to ask questions. So first of all, I am the founder and the executive chairman of the Modern Elder Academy. And you might ask the question, Chip, why would you ever want to call a place the Modern Elder Academy? It sounds like a place for just old people. And first of all, there's nothing wrong with old people. I'll start by saying that. But Modern Elder was a term that the Airbnb founders called me after I was in the company in a full-time role for a couple months. They said, Chip, a modern elder is someone who's as curious as they are wise. They don't just dispense wisdom, they seek it as well. And when I heard that, I initially said, like, okay, well, you're making fun of my age. I was 52 at the time, and the average age in the company was 26. Um, but I actually appreciated the idea of the balance or alchemy of curiosity and wisdom. And I think that has really been my aspiration for more than a dozen years now. Um, this talk is, called Your Best Years Are Ahead of You. And when I was at Airbnb, I started to get really interested about aging and about what it means to be in your 50s. And then for me now and at 64, what it means to actually be growing and aging at the same time. And the reason I believe that our best years are ahead of us is because of a lot of social science research. Some of it from Connecticut, from Yale. Becca Levy at Yale has shown that when you shift your mindset on aging from a negative to a positive, you gain 7.5 years of additional longevity, which is more additional life than if you actually stopped smoking at 50 or if you started exercising at 50. So what we're talking about here is not just something that actually helps you to live a longer life, but you also live a happier life as well. And so how do you do that? How do you move from an anti-aging perspective on your life and the world, especially in a world in which Hallmark cards will remind you on any milestone birthdays at 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, or 90 that you're just getting old and you don't, just as you got comfortable in your own skin, it started to sag. Um, so we as a society in the United States certainly have ageism built into it. Um, so how do you do that? Well, part of it is to try to remember what gets better with age. And that's why I wrote the book, Learning to Love Midlife, 12 Reasons Why Life Gets Better with Age. Because yes, it is true that our short-term memory is not as good as we age, and our body, gets used to gravity, but our emotional intelligence grows as we get older. Our spiritual curiosity grows as we get older. Our valuing of relationships grows as we get older. Our time affluence, as opposed to time poverty. When you're in your 40s, you're in time poverty. But as you get older, you have a little bit more time available to you, and you realize that the scarcest thing in your, in resource you have is your time. And so you get maybe more discerning about how you spend that time. We get wiser as we get older on average. Now there's some 70-year-olds out there who are not as wise as a 30-year-old. But I like to say our painful life lessons are the raw material for our future wisdom. And so you could have two people, a 70-year-old and a 30-year-old, put them in a kitchen and give the 70-year-old a lot of ingredients to cook a meal and give the 30-year-old just a few ingredients. Now, just because the 70-year-old has a lot of raw material, in essence, life experience, doesn't necessarily mean they know how to cook the meal. And the 30-year-old may be wiser just because they know what to do with fewer ingredients. So, metabolizing our life experience is a form of being a chef. It's a form of making sense of what you've learned along the way and applying it to how you get wiser with time. Um, So what else gets better with age? We learn how to be not just old, but whole, how we actually integrate the curious and the wise, the introvert and the extrovert, the masculine, the feminine, the gravitas, depth and levity, humor, lightness, the yin, the yang. When you meet somebody who's 75, 85, 95 years old and have not just grown old, but they're growing whole, what you notice in them is their presence. And it's the presence that, it's sometimes what you notice in a 6 month old as well. When we're very young, we can be very present and observe. When we're very old, we tend to be very present and observe. It's in between that we have the challenge with presence, partly because we're juggling a lot of things. Um, there's social science research that's been going on for, gosh, about 15, 20, actually, yeah, a little over 15 years now, that has shown, it's called the U curve of happiness. And what it's shown is across cultures around the world that as we hit 45 to 50, we hit the low point of life satisfaction. So our life satisfaction is declining from, around age 18 on, and it bottoms out around 45 to 50. And then at around age 50, with each passing decade, we get happier and happier. 50s happier than 40s, 60s happier than 50s, 70s happier than 60s, and women in their 80s happier than 70s. So why is that? There's a lot of reasons for that, and during Q&A, you're welcome to ask more questions about it. But we've had 7,000 graduates now go through the Modern Elder Academy, MEA, with our two campuses, one where I am right now in Baja on the beach in Mexico, and the other being in Santa Fe, New Mexico, on a big 4 square mile ranch. And I would say that some of the reasons that I've observed from graduates from more than 60 countries who've come to visit us is that for a lot of people, it's around 45 to 50 that they are in the major juggling mode. They have serious time poverty. They don't have a lot of time for themselves. Um, Disappointment equals expectations minus reality. So around 45 to 50, you can sort of, at 35, you can still have hope and dreams, but at 45 to 50, you sort of can see the future and it maybe isn't what you expected. Brené Brown, who many of you know from her quite famous TED Talk, is a fan of MEA and been a supporter of us, the Modern Elder Academy. And she has said that what happens, Chip, around 45 to 50 is people have the midlife unraveling. And that means you're unraveling your expectations, you're unraveling your hopes, and you are learning how to create some space to reimagine the second half of your adult life. if you're 54 years old and you're going to live till 90, at age 54, you're exactly halfway between 18 when you turned an adult and 90. And most of us don't think of our lives at 54 as having as much adulthood ahead of us as we have behind us. And that's why I think one of the most important questions for us to ask as we get older is 10 years from now, what will I regret if I don't learn it or do it now? Because there's certain things in life that get harder to do as you get older. And so I learned when I moved to Mexico 9 years ago, 8 years ago, um, I learned how to surf and and I started learning Spanish. Now I had a mindset, a fixed mindset that said, I'm too old to learn to surf. I'm too old to learn a foreign language. But when I put it in the framework of 10 years from now, what will I regret if I don't learn it or do it now? It gave me a catalyst to actually try it because I didn't want to have that regret 10 years from now because anticipated regret is a form of wisdom. So I want to finish up with a little bit of discussion of spirituality since, that's what this group is and the center is about. Richard Rohr is on our faculty at MEA, and many of you know who that is. He teaches with us at our Santa Fe campus because he's based in New Mexico. Um, he says that in the first half of your life, you're building the container. And the container is often the ego. It's the external facing identity that we show to the world. And then it's around midlife that we have to fill the container. And the primary operating system moves from the ego to the soul. And it's part of the reason why around age 50, there's a newfound curiosity about the mysteries of life, spirituality, religion, and our small place in this bigger world. And yet we as a society don't give anybody any operating instructions for this new operating system that is sort of emerging around age 50. So part of the reason that I created MEA, it was I could see that there were a lot of people who were feeling befuddled, stuck, maybe curious, and often going through transitions in their 40s, 50s, and 60s in particular. And they didn't have much in the way of schools or tools or rites of passage or rituals to help them with this. Um, they were, people are going through all kinds of transitions in the middle of their life. You don't just go through transitions as an adolescent, you go through transitions as a middlescent, which is a term, a word that describes people in midlife. And I define midlife quite honestly, based upon my book and based upon all the research I did with sociologists, is in a world in which 25 years from now, in 2050, we will have 8 times as many centenarians, those who've lived to 100. I believe that we're moving into an era in which midlife is 35 to 75. Now, some of you may laugh and say, like, oh my God, that's such a long time, but it is. It is a long time. And yet it's a life stage that we have not really fully grasped because midlife is a relatively modern phenomenon. So what we try to help people with is to navigate transitions, cultivate purpose, own their wisdom, and reframe their relationship with aging based upon Becca Levy's work. Um, the professor who showed that people's, when they shift their mindset on aging, they gain 7.5 years of additional life. So Mark, I'm going to bring you back up here so you and I can have a conversation, a little bit of a fireside chat, and then we can open it up for questions from the group.
Thanks, Chip. That was a great beginning for this conversation. Now I can go in so many directions with this. I want to go back to what you just said about Richard Rohr in the first half of life, building a container. You also said, and then figuring out in the second half of life how to fill it with content. You also said in the book that, I think early in the introduction even, that sort of the first half of life is the dress rehearsal for what is to come. But then I noticed at the end of the book, you, as we I feel like we were talking in the book, as we were talking about the spirituality, that there was clear indicators early in life, um, even amidst the ego-driven stuff that we do early in life, of what we might become and what we might be being called to later in life. So I'm curious. I mean, this is probably hard to answer, but I'm curious what your experience has been in that dynamic of the stuff that we have early on that then shows up later as this sort of this jewel, this thing that is central to our being.
So yeah, I'm a big fan of Joseph Campbell's Hero's Journey work, and one of the things we do at MEA is help people to design their own hero's journey and understand the through line of their life. So what you're speaking to, Mark, is the idea that there are breadcrumbs early in life that help you to sort of have some sense of where you're going to be, and when you can look back on your life, you can connect the dots more easily. Um, I think one of the greatest things we can do is to help people at any age understand those breadcrumbs. Understand, we had I'll tell a quick story. We had a woman, a litigator, so an attorney who does litigation at age 60 come to MEA. And she came to a cultivating purpose workshop. She'd done a cultivating purpose online course with us, and she was clearly focused on her purpose. And and yet she felt lost because for 35 years she'd been a litigator and she was wearing armor. You couldn't see the armor. You could sort of see it on her face because she was very expressionless. She was not the kind of person you wanted to negotiate with because she didn't show her cards. She didn't seem very happy. And yet it felt underneath that, that harsh exterior was somebody who had a radiant light. And long story short is the very first night in Baja, she was here at our Baja campus, as opposed to our Santa Fe campus. The very first night, she had a dream about her grandmother. And she and her grandmother were walking down the beach. Now, her grandmother had passed away 20 years earlier. So this was just a dream. But, the next morning when she was with others, she said, I'm so curious. It was a very vivid dream about my grandmother. The very next night, after she'd been in the classroom and done some of our experiential learning, she had another dream. It was more of like a memory of her grandmother. And it was her and her grandmother in her grandmother's kitchen cooking pies, and she could smell the pies. And so, like, wow, okay, 2 nights in a row, grandma shows up in my dreams. The next morning, she's talking to people, and then people just asked, well, do you like cooking? She says, well, I love cooking. I love cooking desserts. And she said, whenever I go to a foreign country, the first thing I look at on my digital map on my phone is for the closest bakery. Because whether I'm in Croatia or Cuba, I sort of want to check out what they have as baked goods. And then she also said, like, wow, I never thought of it before, but when I invite people over for dinner, I always tell them they have to stay for dessert. So by the end of the week, she had come to the conclusion that when she was in her late teens, she'd forgotten, but she wanted to be a pastry chef when she grew up. She wanted to be a baker, but her father was a attorney. She decided to go to law school. She became a litigator, and the rest is history in terms of 35 years of putting on that armor and going into the courtroom. Now, when she first showed up at MEA, she said to everybody the very first night, I think, I'm 60 years old. I want to work till I'm at 70. And I think I'm just going to become a litigation consultant. Now, nobody said to her, hey, girlfriend, that's swimming in the same pond. But for her, that meant she wouldn't be in the courtroom and having to argue. She'd just be consulting. And that felt like the thing that she should do next. But the reality was sometimes the adjacent thing that is like obvious isn't the thing you're supposed to be doing. What you're supposed to do is to try to uncover the through line of your life from long ago. And that's what you're really speaking to, Mark, is the idea of how do you do that? And this is, you know, a coach, a therapist, a best friend can be means of doing that. Coming to MEA is a means of doing that. But we all could use that because often our life gets so linear that we've put blinders on and we can't really see with peripheral vision other options.
Mm. Yeah, I love that. I love that. So I mean, there's so much in this book, and we're not going to be able to unpack it all. I mean, it's beautifully organized, Chip, and for those of you who haven't had a chance to look at it, he's divided it up into sort of helping us understand how to reframe our physical lives, our emotional life, mental life, vocational life, spiritual life. I kind of want to dive into a couple of those though. So I think maybe go to the emotional piece for a second, because it is such a huge part of our experience, right? You know, so much of our experience is driven by our emotions, much as we'd like to think that we're using our heads to think through things. We're using our heads to rationalize things. But you made a point of that it's important to learn how to dance with your emotions. Um, and I really, really like that metaphor. And I want to kind of just go there and have you riff a little bit about what that means to you and what we can take away from that.
Well, you know, the
I
difference between dancing with your emotions and fighting with your emotions, as if you're a fencer, you know, fencing, you know, with a sword is very different. When you're fencing and you don't want your emotions to get the best of you, which is a very interesting statement. My emotions got the best of me, as if your emotions aren't you. I mean, your emotions, so you know, in essence, what you're saying is I lost control of my emotions. But your emotions are meant to be guides for you. And I wrote a book that became a New York Times bestseller a few years ago called Emotional Equations. And one of the things I learned in writing that book was the idea that, you know, emotions are often really important indicators. If you're angry, there's a reason behind it. If you're jealous, what is it that's, you know, leading to that? Or if you're feeling a sense of happiness. So being able to understand what's behind it is really important. And one of the things that's very true is that as we get older, we become less emotionally reactive. And when we're young, partly because our amygdala is very active and we get the amygdala in our brain gets ambushed, or it takes over, we have a tendency to be like a pinball in a pinball machine. So we're not dancing, we're reacting. It was Viktor Frankl, who spent a few years in concentration camps in World War II, and wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning, who said, between stimulus and response, there is a space, not a reaction. In that space is our power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom. So as we get older, we create more space between stimulus and reaction or response. And in so doing, we have the ability to learn to see the triggering reaction, the emotion, and then rather than act upon it immediately, dance with it in, you know, in a way that allows you to not think of it as getting the best of you, but think of it as being the best in you, but needing to have a little bit of tempering. Um, in the dancing metaphor, I also love the dancing metaphor around the soul and the ego. I don't know about the rest of you, but I took sixth grade ballroom dancing class. And as a boy, my job was to lead the girl, and she was wearing heels, and my job was to lead the dance. And then so that's the way I like to think of it is the ego is leading the dance for the first half of your life. And your soul is going backwards in heels. And it is around midlife that the soul starts leading the dance.
Nice.
And the ego is going backwards in heels. And the ego going backwards in heels, you have one of two choices. either, and men who are not used to doing this, women are sort of nodding their heads saying, I know what that's like. But for men, and forget about men and gender, like I'm not saying that, what I'm saying really here is the ego is not used to being embarrassed. The ego is not used to being sort of publicly humiliated. And the ego better actually get a sense of humor in the second half of our life. And being able to see that having the soul lead the dance leads to a lot more liberation and it allows you to be a little more carefree. And so there's a real upside to allowing the soul to lead the dance. But sometimes in the midlife era, around 50-ish, there's a bit of a war going on between the soul and the ego as to who's in control. Um, so, so yes, I appreciate the dancing metaphor on two levels. The fact that I think as we get older, we learn to dance with our emotions, and also as we get older, it's the soul who's leading the dance.
And that chapter, or those chapters about the emotions, really made me start to think also about how important it is to develop um, our capacities to be not only in touch with our own feelings, but also in touch with the feelings of others. And while we've invested a lot of time and effort into understanding all that over the last 20 years, all the work that people have done on emotional intelligence, starting with Daniel Goleman and others. I'm now beginning to wonder whether or not as much effort needs to be actually put into really, really thinking through the way in which we interact and the relational spaces that we occupy with others. Because if we know that connection and having really strong connection is a marker for longevity
Number one.
yeah.
It's the number one variable
Isn't
for
it
living.
important for us not to only be sort of in touch with ourselves and our emotions, but also really good at dancing with others? And
Yeah.
be curious and listening more than we do. Here I am, like going on and on and on,
No,
like
it's
your typical guy transmitting. But do you know what I'm trying to get to?
you do like the dancing metaphor, but yes, the dancing metaphor applied to our dance with others.
Yeah.
There's no refutable evidence that shows that there's anything but the number one variable for living a longer, healthier, happier life is how invested are we in social relationships in midlife and beyond. And for the men on the call, gosh, a lot of men have seen their friendship muscle atrophy in their 20s, 30s, and 40s.
Mhm.
Whereas women, friendships and relationships are more core to who they are, as opposed to being the rugged individualist, which a lot of men see themselves as. And unfortunately, that leads to, a situation for a lot of men in midlife where they feel lost and alone. And I lost 5 male friends to suicide, ages 42 to 52, between 2008 and 2010. And in many of those cases, we had no idea that our friend was going through such a troubling time because, we men have a tendency to hold it in. So relationships are important. Loneliness, Vivek Murthy has shown that extreme loneliness has the comparability health wise of smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So how we relate with each other is important. Now, part of this means learning how to think of friendship as a practice. We think of golf as a practice or yoga as a practice, and there's all kinds of things you can practice. But we tend to not think of friendship in an intentional kind of way. Many people. We think of it as just the thing that you do, just like breathing and sleeping. But you can breathe or sleep in better ways. You know, just because it's something you do to live doesn't mean you are doing it the right way. And so learning how to invest in friendships and to think of having deeper conversations with people and being open to opening ourselves up with someone else. That's an important part of this because friendships alone, just having a lot of them, quantity is not as valuable as quality. And that's pretty clear social science wise. If you have a lot of friends, but no one knows you and you don't feel truly seen for who you are, that is not nearly as good as having two deeply close friends and, you know, a few acquaintances. So, so part of this is learning how to actually open yourself up to be intimate with others, which for a lot of people, especially in the Northeast, um, uh, isn't what they grew up with. Um,
And especially for men.
especially for men. Yes.
All right, well, I'm gonna shift gears here for a second and go to another set of chapters, the mental life chapters. And one of the ideas in that, so many ideas that I love, but one that I loved was this whole notion of um, knowing how your story serves you um, and rewriting it, rewriting the narrative.
Mhm.
Um, so it serves you. I was wondering whether you could share a little bit of your thinking about that.
Yeah. You know, when you're reading a book, a novel, a quarter of the way through the book, you don't necessarily know all the characters and the themes, but by halfway in the book, you tend to know the characters really well and the themes well. And that's sort of true in life, in our own, not only in terms of other people, but ourselves. We understand who we are. We understand the themes and maybe the through lines or the, you know, what are the breadcrumbs and the connecting of the dots. And so understanding our own narrative and who we are gives us the ability to get clearer about where we're going, what we're here on earth to do. Whether that's the sense of a calling in a career, or whether that's the sense of what habitats are going to make us happy, or what kind of partners or friends will make us happy. Um, so yeah, I think this is a really underappreciated part of midlife is when people truly get to know who they are. Now, sometimes it's hard. One of the challenges for a lot of people in midlife is they realize they've been living their parents' life. The parent, you know, the parents, their community, their spouse, they have been reading a script from someone else who is the screenwriter. You're just the actor. And then you realize at age 50 or 55, like, my God, whose life is this? And that can be a real wake up call. And sometimes people freak out, like American Beauty with you know, Kevin Spacey, Lester Burnham. You know, he just all of a sudden gets a sports car and you know, almost has an affair with his daughter's high school best friend. That's what we consider a midlife crisis. Often when someone feels both a combination of I'm no longer young and I want to be young again. So you actually go from adolescence to adolescence in terms of your behavior. And number two is I have no clue who I am. So I'm just going to go, I'm going to go out and like try a lot of things. And sometimes in the trying of a lot of things, you look a bit silly. Um, but there's something to be said for having guides who can help you and support you and maybe observe you as enlightened witnesses to help you to see who you are based upon you know what you're saying and what you know and how you want to evolve who you are relative to who you've been. So much of this comes down to something we call success scripts. There's something called money scripts, which are the scripts that you were handed at, you know, in early in life to understand how your relationship with money. Well, there's also success scripts. And a success script means the dominant definition of success that maybe have been imprinted upon you that says, in order for you to be successful, you need to have 4 children and live in the suburbs and be a member of a country club and have X amount of money in the bank, and and your kids all had to go to Ivy League schools. And that may be true for some people, and for a lot of others, it's like, no, that's my parents. And being able to understand around midlife often that you have agency to write your own script um, is incredibly liberating. Um, and that doesn't mean you go leave your wife. It doesn't, I mean, it doesn't mean you get selfish and irresponsible, but it does mean you start to have a different pair of glasses you're wearing as you're making decisions.
Mm. And it sounds like that the how you define success maybe changes over time. Um, as you begin to realize what's important to you and what you might be bringing into the world. It's almost as if the metrics change a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I do think the metrics change. I think it's that a little bit of that Brene Brown midlife unraveling. If you thought you were going to be president of the United States, and you have never run for office and you're 60 years old, you probably are not going to be president of the United States. If you thought you married your soulmate, at 25 and by 45, you realized they're not your soulmate, and quite frankly, they're not somebody you want to live with, that can be disappointing. But the key thing to remember is this idea of the painful life lessons. When you have these life lessons, these school of hard knocks experiences, they are teaching you something that is meant to give you some wisdom. And your job is to actually take that wisdom and make a better life as a result of it. And then also share that wisdom, because when someone's smart or savvy, it's not a social good. But if you are wise, that is a social good. It's meant to be shared. So yeah.
So, let's go. I was actually going to go in the direction of the School of Hard Knocks because, um, you're pretty forthright that you experienced them, and I shared with you that I had as well. So not that we're going to talk about that, but I do think, I mean, so much of the book actually is so helpful in terms of laying out ways in which we can, um, thoughtfully and intentionally, um, some of the experience that we've had, in life. Um, but I really want to hear you talk a little bit more about how some of these negative experiences, which must be somehow part of shedding the skin, and using your chrysalis model of the caterpillar shedding its skin and forming the chrysalis is absolutely necessary um, to our growth.
Yeah, so there's these three stages of most transitions. There's the ending of something, the messy middle, and the beginning of something. And at MEA, we call this TQ, transitional intelligence. And transitional intelligence, for those who are curious about this, at the bottom of the MEA website, which is meawisdom.com, maybe somebody could put that in the chat, meawisdom.com. You'll see at the bottom footer, there's a bunch of free resources, and one of them is called The Anatomy of a Transition. And it's a white paper kind of thing of how to understand transitions. And so, you have caterpillar, chrysalis, butterfly. And so we also call midlife the midlife chrysalis, not the midlife crisis. So when you're in the chrysalis, in that sort of dark and gooey middle stage, it's very liminal. It can feel very awkward, and you can feel like you're just like having a very difficult time. And that's part of the experience. Um, one of the challenges a lot of people have, there's a guy named, oh my God, I'm totally spacing out on his name right now. He's a Harvard professor, Dan Gilbert. Dan gave a TED talk and he said, human beings are works in progress that mistakenly think they're finished. And it's so true. Somehow we think as we become adults, we're supposed to consciously control everything such that the only transitions we have are the ones that we control. But that isn't true. There are collective involuntary transitions like COVID. There are personal involuntary transitions like losing your job or getting divorced, or getting cancer. So there are a lot of, there are, first of all, we have to start by saying, because you're going through a transition doesn't mean that you're getting the game of life wrong. Transitions are normal. Women go through menopause, all of them. Like everybody goes through all women go through menopause. So because you're going through menopause doesn't mean you're the first one who's done it, nor that you're getting the game of life wrong. Your parents are going to die. That happens to all of us. Now, you may have regrets about not having a conversation with one of your two parents before they passed. That is true. And you can have some regret there. But that, the fact that your parents are dying is going to be something that everybody's going to experience. So I think one of the challenges we have, Mark, is that we think we have more control over life than we actually do have. And what we really need to look at is how do we respond to life? There are some things we do have control over. I have control over my next sentence, but there's a lot of things that we don't have control over. And just because we don't have control over it doesn't mean that we're a bad person. But what we need to really look at, as I've looked at in the hospitality business forever, is it's not about being perfect in the hotel business. It's about how do you respond to problems when they come up.
Mhm.
And that's as a guest, you really appreciate a hotel or a hotelier, um, who is able to respond really well. Well, that's the lens I use in looking at life. I can't control everything, but I can have influence, just like Viktor Frankl said, between stimulus and response, there's a space. In that space is your power to choose your response. And in your response lies your growth and your freedom. How you respond, how in a hotel you're kind of in a situation when somebody's bath overflows above you and all of a sudden you have water coming into your room. I mean, how the hotel addresses that in a way that makes you feel respected and appreciated is really critical. So, how do we do that for ourselves in our own lives? How do we respond to unexpected things in a way that allows us to show our wisdom? And then also, finally, to recognize that when stuff happens in our lives and it's not what we wanted, we're supposed to learn something from it. And that's where wisdom comes. And if someone says, well, I don't feel like I'm very wise, the question I would ask them is, well, 10 years, do you make better decisions today, or did you make better decisions 10 years ago? And 95% of the time, people will say, I make better decisions today. And my response to that is, the only reason you said that, the only reason you responded that way is because in the last 10 years, you went through the school of hard knocks and you learned some things, and that was the raw material for your future wisdom, which you're saying you're wiser than you used to be. So people don't think they're wise. It sounds abstract and something that Yoda does, or Gandalf does, or some guy in a white robe and a white beard. But the truth is, we're all wise. We all have wisdom baked into our life experience.
Mhm. Actually, that now gets me to the topic that I was thinking of going to next, amazingly again. Um, because wisdom, hmm, I found myself disappointingly in two spaces this last week, um, where there was a serious question as to whether or not younger generations were at all interested in the wisdom that older generations have to share. And I don't have any problem saying what the spaces were. One was a men's space, people working in the men's movement trying to figure out how to respond to what's going on now. And the other was actually the Episcopal Church, um, recognizing that perhaps the younger members of the Episcopal Church don't want um, anything to do with what some of the elders have learned and experienced. You have a lot to say on all this. You wrote a whole book on it.
Yeah, I wrote a book called
So,
Wisdom at Work: The Making of a Modern Elder, based upon my experience at Airbnb. You want me to talk about that?
I really would like for you to talk a few minutes on that, just
Yeah.
to hear what you think. And because at the end of the book, you're, learning to love midlife. You talk about sharing your wisdom.
Yeah.
And, so what does that look like?
That's why I think wisdom's a really important topic that's making a comeback. You know, 2000 years ago, wisdom was a hot topic. And then we moved into the knowledge era about 500 years ago, and scientific method and ultimately knowledge workers and computers became the thing. And then now that we have ChatGPT and Google and all this, like the truth is we're awash in knowledge, but what we desperately are needing is more wisdom. Um, so, but let's start with the intergenerational collaboration piece. I had to learn that at Airbnb. I was a boomer, I am a boomer, and I was surrounded by millennials. Now, back in that day, there was a meme going around, which was okay, boomer. And the video was, a hand in the face from the millennial saying, okay, boomer. And what that, if you know the origin story of that meme, it was the following. It was this younger person feeling like there was an older, it was a younger woman, if I'm not mistaken, who thought an older man was telling her how the world works. And she didn't want to be told how the world works. Your war stories are not necessarily wisdom if they're not presented in a way that has a certain humility built into it.
Right.
Um, and so for my experience at Airbnb, and then since then, in being, one of the leading advocates in the world for intergenerational collaboration and teaching this in many companies and organizations, is the following. When we have the model that says, I am the mentor and you are the mentee, and I want you to learn from me, it feels an awful lot like a parent-child relationship. And younger people will reject that and react to that uh, in a negative way. So the real key here is to recognize that there's a natural reaction that you're going to get from a younger person if you come from a place of authority that feels very parental or a know-it-all kind of way. So 75% of millennials want to have a mentor, and only 1% actually have one. So there's a real desire for some mentorship, but it needs to come from a place of humility, curiosity, um, and a willingness to learn in both directions. Part of the reason I really did well at Airbnb for 7.5 years and had 100 mentees was because I had the perspective that those young people can teach me as much as I can teach them. There'll be different topics. I was sharing EQ, emotional intelligence, and they were sharing DQ, digital intelligence. And we were both better off for it. So it was a form of like an intergenerational potluck. And so, in sum, there's a real opportunity for us to create this kind of dynamic where young people are thirsty for some of the wisdom of older people, but older people are thirsty for some of the knowledge, sometimes wisdom, but knowledge that's very topical knowledge, knowing how to use ChatGPT to its fullest extent. Knowing, and as in my case at Airbnb, understanding millennial lifestyle habits that are very different than for me as a boomer, but not going straight to judgment.
Right.
It was Walt Whitman who is uh, quoted by Ted Lasso, the TV guy, which is curiosity, not judgment. And so one of my chief things I say to older people who would like to work with younger people is how do you invest in your curiosity and your respect of the younger people, not your judgment. Um, and what I've seen over and over again is that when you show up that way, um, you'll get a mirror back at you from the younger person who may show up with curiosity and a lack of judgment. But if you
Yeah.
show up with judgment, or authority, you're going to get, you may find that your kids aren't listening to you.
Yeah. All right, we're running along here, and I knew that was gonna happen, but maybe you'll stay with us a little bit longer. I'd love to get some questions in here.
Here's what I would love. The one thing I would ask is if you have a question, please turn on your video. In fact, I'd love to have many of you turn on your videos now, just because we're going to open this up, and I'm now on gallery view. So it'd be great to see some friendly faces out there. Oh, thank you. You guys are doing it. I appreciate that. And so if you want to ask a question, you can just raise your hand, or at the bottom under the react where it says a heart there. Um, oh, wait. Yeah, recognize hand gestures. So like I am, well, let's see. Am I able to raise my hand there? No. Yes, I am.
I think React is where it is.
React.
Love
Yeah.
it.
But you know what? You can also just raise your hand by like doing this, what I'm doing right now. Cicely, do you have a question? And you're gonna need to unmute yourself when you ask the question.
Um, okay,
You're
so
delightful, Cicely. I can already just tell that you're just a delightful person. Because
thank you.
you had your video on the whole time and you
I
just
didn't
like,
know how to do this business of actually seeing. Well, it doesn't matter. I have, yeah, things I want to say. One, I'm going to start with, I'm 91 years old. Thanks. Right. I'm not dead yet. I've loved everything that you've said. What I want to say about being 91 is curiosity saves your life.
yeah.
Um,
Curiosity did not may have killed the cat, but it saved your life.
absolutely, absolutely fundamental. Now, some other things help, like regular exercise. They're not lying about that, but and a diet that's good, but basically curiosity. And so I loved your book. I want you to know I loved your book. Yeah, I did. And I kept thinking, okay, so the practice of gratitude is life-saving as well.
Yes.
I'm ordained as an interfaith minister. I've been in practice as a pastoral counselor for 45 years. I am so privileged to have had that experience. I went through the very, very messy, who am I? 2 divorces, a mess. Ohio housewife you're looking at. So then graduate schools of several kinds, seminaries, graduate schools. So, okay. So the whole business of being listening to people's stories, being healed as they tell me their story, being healed myself, being so privileged and so honored to be trusted with their stories. And one of the things I learned, and I'd love to hear your views about this, is we can become if we become aware of our emotions, and heaven knows that's a really good thing, and I'm all for men catching up with that. Or my generation and people I married wouldn't know feelings, they fell over it. So here we are, and now we know our emotional stories, and what I'm seeing that can happen easily is falling in love with our own dramas.
Oh my God, yes.
So seduced by our own deep feelings and dramas that we can't possibly dance with them. Not
Yeah.
possibly, because we are what they are. We are the drama. And we can't, if we let it go, how will we be important? How
Yeah.
will we matter?
Well, sometimes the drama, Cicely, it has to do with that sort of victim, perpetrator, witness kind of
Any shape at all.
dynamic. And you create an identity that is based upon the story.
Yeah.
So stories can be both liberating and incarcerating. And it is when you have the capacity to see your shadow side, to use some Carl Jung language and that Richard Rohr talks about, and to be able to liberate yourself from the shadow and the cell that you've created in terms of the narrative, it is remarkable what can change in your life as a result of that. And I see it all the time at MEA. It's one of my favorite things to do with people is to help take them on their hero's journey and to see for so many people, they're stuck at the bottom of that journey. They're stuck at the toiling and challenging place, and they have gotten stuck down there because the story has become an anchor.
And victimization. I'm a victim. I'm a victim. I'm a victim.
Yeah.
Rather than I'm choosing.
Yeah.
And then being a victim becomes my MO.
One of the favorite things I did, I spent yesterday and the day before with a friend of mine who was CEO of one of the most famous companies in the world. And I don't want to say he got fired, but he sort of got fired 6 months ago. And he'd been successful his whole life in everything he's ever done outwardly. And he wanted to spend 24 hours together because he's really lost. Because his story was, I'm the successful one. I'm an admiration addict. And I helped him to see that, you know what? I'll use a different name for him. I said, you are admirable Steve. And everybody sees you as admirable Steve. You're a good person. You're a good leader. You're successful. You have built an identity around that. And it is time, because deeply woven in who you are is a belief in Christ and God. And he's a religious guy, but he doesn't show that. But more importantly, he's a spiritual guy. And he's got a sense that something's supposed to come through him. And he realized that he needed to start calling himself Admirable Steve whenever he got caught up in his own story, to say, I'm supposed to show up as that person. And it's not that, what the challenge for some people is they go the opposite. Oh no, I'm supposed to be the not admiral. And they want to be like, and that's, again, midlife crisis kind of stuff where you go from being the bored, father in the suburbs to like wanting to be, drive race cars. It's not about that. It's about like being able to see yourself in that identity. And that's, when you are in that identity, you're playing a role. And yeah, Dick Schwartz's work on Part's work he's on our faculty as well, is really helpful for this.
Well, just, I don't want to take up too much of my time, but I would love to have you speak to this business of being seduced by our own dramas so that we wear them like the t-shirt, you know.
No, I think it's unfortunately when we go to that place, we don't give space for another identity to start emerging in our life.
We shut off possibilities.
Yeah, we do. Thank you, Cicely.
Someone else?
Thomas.
There, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Great. I had a notion. I just want to check it by you and see what you think. We go through life and we're looking at kind of what we don't have, and we go out in the world and we get those tools and we put them in our box and we keep going. But we get to a certain point in our age as we get older that we have to switch engines, switch gears to go, now I'm accepting myself. I have the tools in my box and I have to love myself. Where before we weren't really doing that, we're going, I am coming from a place of lacking. I just love your comments on that.
Yeah, well, I mean, in some ways, Thomas, we spend the first half of our life accumulating.
Yeah.
We accumulate knowledge, skills, friends, relationships, ultimately marriage, maybe kids, responsibilities, stuff. So we're going out and accumulating. And the key is to recognize in the second half of life, when you move from the pursuit of happiness to the comfort of contentment, that the second half of life is not about accumulating. It's about distilling and editing and realizing that you have built a lot, you have a lot of stuff, you have a lot of knowledge and wisdom. And now it's a matter of it's not a plus equation, plus, 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 plus. it's a division equation, which speaks to the idea that you're looking for the square root of something, the essence of what is important. And so, unfortunately, for a lot of people, especially strivers, there's a guy named Arthur Brooks who wrote a book called From Strength to Strength. He wrote about me and MEA in the book, and he's on our faculty. He teaches with us this summer in Santa Fe. The striver's curse is the idea that you just strive and you move to the next thing to strive. Oh, I was striving at this and I was striving at that. And my friend, who I will call Steve, the CEO, was striving and succeeding. And so some people at midlife get to midlife and say, oh, I'm disappointed because I didn't accomplish all these things. And then some people get to midlife and say, oh, I accomplished all these things. And is that all there is? And for, I think, a lot of people, what's necessary, Thomas, in the second half of your life is to stop striving and stop trying to accumulate and start to appreciate, have gratitude, and distill the wisdom, distill what's important, and then share it. There's a beautiful David Viscott quote, which is the purpose of life is to discover your gift. The work of life is to develop it. And the meaning of life is to give it away.
That's great.
I might shift that and speak to wisdom. This is a Chip Conley quote. The purpose of life is to discover your wisdom. The work of life is to develop it. The meaning of life is to give that wisdom away. And Eric Erickson, a developmental psychologist, said, I am what survives me. And I think that's very true, but it doesn't have to be your name on a university building. It can
Thank
be
you.
the way
Yeah.
you've touched others. Last question is coming from Liz. And Liz, there you go.
Yeah, thank you. My question has to do with friendship and loneliness. And, I know you said that connection is one of the most important things in regards to longevity. And so my question is, how do we practice? You mentioned practice. How do we practice intentional friendships and cultivate those?
Well, here's an exercise. Do you have a phone with you, Liz?
I do. It's across the room. I can
Okay.
get.
Go get it. Go get it, Liz. We're going to do this together. And Liz is going to be our guinea pig.
Okay.
Oh, Liz is now regretting that she asked the question.
Yeah,
All right.
because I'm not real technical here, but
That's okay. You're going to just send a text to someone. So, Liz, who is somebody in your life who you wish was more integrated in your life? Somebody you care and appreciate, and you could send a text to them right now and just say, I was thinking about you on a Sunday, and it would be great to connect. And it's somebody who you don't see as much. Who might that person be?
I'm thinking about my friend Jeannie, one of my close college friends. And yeah, we don't connect very often, but when we do, we feel like we're still back in college. Yeah.
Do you have her phone number?
Yeah.
Send her a text right now.
Okay.
Send her a text and just tell her that you were thinking of her and that you miss her and you love the way you connect. And you'd love to, either, I don't know if she's in the same area, love to get together in person or just do a Zoom call in the next week. And I've just given you a very simple example. There's a lot more to it. And in my book, Learning to Love Midlife, I give some other steps, but it's taking intentional steps to build bridges with people. And sometimes people come back from an MEA workshop, they love it, and they feel like, oh my God, I feel so much connected with myself, with others. And then they say, I can't have these kinds of deep conversations with my friends or my family. And I think that we don't necessarily outgrow our friends or family, but we outgrow the conversations we've been having with them. And sometimes we have to take the step to say, like, let's have a more meaningful conversation, etc. So thanks, Liz. I guess we have two more hands, so I will stay around for Andrew and JG.
My question is more about your academy. Does your academy help with
Yes,
a
exactly.
clarification of this in any way?
Yeah, I also just put my my email in the chat for anybody who wants to write me directly. Yeah, so Andrew, you are like ground zero for the kind of people who come to MEA. They are feeling stuck, or they're going through a transition, or they want to go through a transition and are not sure how to get there. They're feeling a desire to connect with their purpose, maybe even connect with their wisdom. So yes, we have lots of workshops that focus specifically on that. And we have workshops every week of the year in both Baja and Santa Fe. So you're welcome to email me directly to ask more about it, though. And yes,
Okay.
I welcome any of you. We have people for average age of the person who comes to MEA is 54. We've had people as young as 25 and as old as 92. Cicely, you could come.
No, that would be great because yeah, I'm thinking of. I do think there's a huge need for men to release a lot of like what you guys have been talking, and I feel like I emote well with men if I can get them to open up. So I want to go into like a coaching space for them,
Yeah,
but I'm deathly afraid of the financial piece with two kids. So
yeah, I understand a lot how old are you, Andrew?
I'm 46.
Yeah. First of all, you're at the bottom of the U curve of happiness on
I know
average.
it's been a lonely ride, I got to tell you, but I'm
I'm
living
glad.
with.
No, so let's give Andrew a hand for actually just speaking up and saying this, because honestly, it's a lot of men won't do that, and so I want you to write me, okay,
All right, I'll
uh,
do that. Thank you.
Jack.
Thank you, Chip. Yeah, what you were saying about, when we are adults and we're older, um, we think we have to control things and that things are within our control. And when you said that, I thought of, Epictetus saying that we have to distinguish, between what is within our control and what is not. And then that raised what Marcus Aurelius said, that we have to live each day as if it's our last. And I'm just, if you think about those teachings, how does that inform how we approach aging, not as decline, but as a sort of a
Opportunity.
final masterpiece, if you will.
Yeah. No, listen. Gosh, you gotta come teach at MEA. Uh, yeah, I'm a big fan of Stoics. You've mentioned a couple of them. Uh, you know, I'm a big fan of the Serenity Prayer also, which is God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference, which is really what Epictetus was saying. Um, we as a society have a tendency to look at the physical body as the definition of a person's age. Part of that's because of Madison Avenue, part of that's because of Hollywood. And therefore, when you look at a tree, you can tell how old it is by how tall it is, but also mostly because of the number of rings it has inside. But when it comes to humans, we don't see the rings inside, we see the wrinkles outside. And so we get really fixated on this idea of physical age. And there's a point of view which is you can age or you can grow. You can't do both. When you see a 15-year-old and you haven't seen that person in 2 years, you say, "Oh my, Johnny, how you've grown." And when you say a 55-year-old, and you will not say, "My Johnny, how you've grown," because you'll say like, "Oh, you're talking about my waist." But we grow in all kinds of ways. So if we get obsessed with the physical side of things, we don't realize that we're growing relationally, socially, intellectually, emotionally, spiritually. And so we know something called old growth redwoods. I grew up and spent time on the West Coast. Lots of old growth redwoods, old growth forests. Well, I think there are old growth humans. And I don't think that aging and growth are mutually exclusive. I think you do both your whole life. So as your 15-year-old, you're aging, but no one would say that. And at 65, you're growing. But what we'll get fixated on is the aging part of that. And part of what you're hearing right now is this sense that we need language and ways of talking that are pro-aging, not anti-aging. Because again, back to Becca Levy at Yale, when you shift that mindset on aging in this way that I'm talking about, which is not easy because of the societal, ageism that we deal with, it makes a big difference. So, and I think reading Stoics is helpful because quite frankly, some of the best wisdom we have is age-old wisdom. So thanks for the question. And I am going to run because I have
Yeah, well,
I have Elizabeth Gilbert here. Liz Gilbert, Eat, Pray, Love, is in my home with me. She just arrived like 10 minutes before I got on the phone with you guys because she and I are teaching together here in Baja starting tomorrow for the coming week. And so literally she's in my home and I said, Liz, and Liz has taught with me before in Santa Fe. I said, Liz, I can't hang out with you right now. I've got to go meet these darn people who are forcing me to be with them. So I can't be with you as you arrive and you're staying and living in my home for the next week for this workshop. So, yes.
Well,
I hope I
well-
see some of you at MEA. I hope you're all welcome to write me with my email. And Mark, thank you for inviting me.
Well, thank you, Chip. This hour and plus has been just chock full of insight. I knew it would be. I'm glad we recorded it so everybody can go back and look at it again and again. And with that, I would like to close out with a final blessing for everyone. May you be happy. May you be well. May you be safe. May you be peaceful and at ease until we meet again. Thanks, everybody. Have a great evening.